And you're live.
This is House Education, Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. We are turning our attention to language that is in the big bill in the budget concerning adult education. And we're going to get some testimony right now. But I think if you wouldn't mind, as our witnesses, perhaps we may need a little bit of a history lesson from January as to various pieces of language exist in various places, none of which have passed, I don't think. And maybe you could help us out, because I know there was important language in the BAA concerning sort of this group of students who were in limbo about getting their high school diplomas. Not quite sure where that is, or any of the language that was in the BAA. Since I don't think we have a BAA, it was vetoed. And that language, I assume, was put in the big bill. And then we've got the language that's in the big bill that you want to speak to us about. And just so the committee understands, the reason we're doing this is because House Appropriations asked me if our committee can provide some guidance to them, them being the conference committee, as to what to do. They're also hearing themselves on a lot of this. So maybe if you don't mind, I'll leave it to you. If you guys just introduce yourselves and then catch us up to date.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm Catherine Kalkstein. I'm the Executive Director of Central Vermont Adult Education.
And I'm Brian Kravitz. I'm Director of Outreach and Workforce Development at Central Vermont Adult Education.
So in terms of bringing you up to speed, I mean, we can answer some questions after I'm done. And I'm going to read my testimony because this is a very complicated issue and the language is very important and I don't want to misspeak. But I just want to say, like, if there are pieces that were in the BAA that are no longer around, it's because we were sort of building the plane as we were flying it. And the ADP program at the time in January was not around. And in February, the pilot project launched. And so some of the things that were concerns for us in January have been resolved to a certain extent. And so that's why some of that language is not being carried forward and continuing for us to like push the lever on that.
Okay, then go right ahead. Testimony.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to hear testimony on this issue. We know there's been a lot of communication and action taken around adult education, and we're grateful for this committee's continued attention to the issue. I want to start with a little background about how we got here. So for those of you who have been on this committee, you may remember the original high school completion program student access report, which initiated a lot of changes that we've seen around adult education over the last few years. Many of those changes have been positive, and we've seen progress on adult education funding, which was critical for us. This is the first year that we did not have to ask the legislature for more money because the report's recommendations have resulted in the Agency of Education and the AEL providers agreeing to the total amount that should be budgeted for adult education in the state budget. And that is a big success that we don't want to lose sight of. So we are grateful for the work that was done on that, and we thank you. Unfortunately, we currently find ourselves in a situation where some of the recommendations from that original report have not been realized. This has resulted in a disproportionate impact on providers and is the issue that brings us here today. The Agency of Education and all 4 providers agreed to the recommendations in that original high school completion student access report. One of those recommendations was to modernize the funding formula currently under the State Board of Education, and this work has not yet happened. So there were kind of 2 levels to the funding piece. There was the overall state appropriation to adult education, and then there is the allocation of those funds to the organizations. And that's what the funding formula is about, is allocating that appropriation to the providers on the ground. So although the overall appropriation of funding for adult education was successful, the proposed allocation of those funds for fiscal years 26 through 28 is highly problematic. In February, the Agency of Education released an RFP, a request for proposals, for adult education, which completely replaced the state board funding formula with the 26% 2-year average that's in statute. So that's how our funding appropriation was determined, with this language that has been in statute for many, many years. And that's the 26% 2-year average. While the AEL providers have long agreed that the funding formula needed to be updated, because it has been inequitable, no one knew that the 26% 2-year average appropriation would become allocation to providers. And doing so does not honor the study committee recommendation to have a process to modernize the funding formula that includes provider expertise.
They ask you to pause there and perhaps go over that next to the last sentence again. No one knew the 26% 2-year average appropriation, which you're in favor of, would become the allocation to providers.
Correct.
So how is, I mean, it is the overall allocation to providers.
It's now becoming.
It's the sum total of the allocation.
In the RFP, it is become how each organization, each county would receive funding based on how many students in each county are served. And so there are some counties, as you can imagine, that are more rural that don't see as many students. And so this sudden shift, as we'll get to a little bit later, has created kind of a dramatic decrease in the dollar amount for the more rural communities.
No decrease in the overall dollar amount.
No.
Okay.
No. Okay, so as you can see from the funding memo we submitted for this testimony, hopefully you have it, the RFP uses a per pupil served allocation. In doing so, the Northeast Kingdom would lose over $500,000 in funding. We rallied in January in February when this happened, we rallied to support the NEKLS, which is the provider in the Northeast Kingdom, because we recognized that a cut that big would make it difficult to provide students with services in the Northeast Kingdom. We do not want to revert back to the old state formula because the study committee recognized it is also inequitable. The 3 providers who collectively serve 11 of our 14 counties, Central Vermont Adult Education, the Tutorial Center, and Vermont Adult Learning, ultimately would like to see a per student funding basis. However, we recognize the need for a transition period so that NEKLS can continue to provide high quality services. As a compromise, the AELN has worked together to present a solution that allows all providers to move forward while minimizing the negative impact to NEKLS. So I'd ask you, if you can, please take a look at the funding distribution document that's posted on the web page. It's the one with the kind of blue banner on the top and a couple of charts. So if you look at this document and you look at the top chart, you'll see that there are sort of 3 possible allocation options. And I'll kind of go through them because it can be a little confusing if you don't know how to read this chart. One option reflected in the column titled Old State Board Formula is actually quite inequitable. So it's the first column is the students served. The second one's the Old State Board Formula. And you can see that it's quite inequitable because if you look down at the chart below that, in the first column, it shows you the dollars that are allocated to each organization. So as you can see from the bottom chart, that formula results in a per student funding range from $2,700 to $6,000. The NEK has gotten significantly more funding per student under the state board formula for decades. As you can see in the bottom chart, and this is really what we want to move away from because it does not serve the majority of the AEL students well. So then option 2 is the 2-year student average column, which is what is proposed by the AOE in the current RFP. And it creates true equity in the student allocation. If you look at the bottom chart, you see each student is getting the $3,294. However, as you can see from the top chart, it will, for the next few years, make it difficult to provide services in the Northeast Kingdom because it's a huge cut. So the last column, the average of the 2 column, represents AELN's recommended compromise. As you can see, NEKLS still gets the more per student, if you look at the bottom chart, but it levels the playing field a bit. And we recognize that NEKLS still takes a significant cut. However, we feel this is the most equitable solution. Here, the language in the budget currently do not accommodate this compromise. The language reverts back to the board funding formula, which is the $30,000. The budget language document posted on the web page shows the edits that were included. The language
How do we go about getting this changed? No one seemed to be able to tell us how we could get that done. So we feel it's imperative that we extract ourselves from the state board, and our compromise is proposed only for the FY26 to reduce the cut to any KLS while we work with the Agency of Education and the Agency of Administration on a long-term equitable solution around how we allocate the funding. And then in addition, I do not believe it's in this language, but I do want to be clear because I just heard testimony from the AOE about this, that we do not want the current RFP pulled or our current contracts extended. The deadline for the RFP passed. It was April 25th. We spent hours and hours and hours working on this 60-page proposal that we had to submit to the Agency of Ed. So it was 100 staff hours, and it's been submitted and done. So we really kind of don't want to turn the clock back on that.
This is the RFP to name the organizations as the
As the providers. Yep.
as the providers. Okay.
Correct.
How long is that RFP good for? Or how long
Well,
is
the current one that's out now is good for 3 years. Yeah, so that's why earlier I referred to FY26 through 28.
basically, if I wanted to create Bob's adult education, I can also compete in the RFP process?
You can, but you'll have to now wait until the next one's issued in FY28. So if that's your retirement plan, you have to wait a while. So we realize that we are here in the final hour, and we're asking this committee to please support this proposed language to the Budget Conference Committee. They are aware that the adult education language is not perfect. In the Senate Appropriations Committee, there were a lot of comments about needing to fix the final language in the conference committee. We've heard from members on House Appropriations that they would prefer a recommendation to come from House Education, since this is your purview. So we're asking you to recommend this budget language and have Legislative Council draft it. Questions?
All right, going to review a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, so currently, what is before the conference committee? Is there any difference right now between the two sides in the language? There is.
Yes.
Yeah, Meg, go ahead. You can help us out here.
Yes, there is. Subsection F is actually the same in both, but the rest is different in the House and Senate budgets. And we've heard from members of both committees that they plan to look at all of it together.
Okay, but subsection F is what we're really talking about.
Subsection F, we are proposing changes to, yes.
And that's what we have here.
You have all of it. So I'm sorry, there's a subsection F and then it goes into E 504.3. Subsection F
Oh,
is in
sorry.
504.102.
Okay.
But it's all this is the whole package of adult education language, and everything below the E504.3 is different in the House and Senate budgets.
All right, so if we were to take out all this underlined language that's in the areas of the document you provided for section 504.3, like letter B, for example, that's existing language, existing
Everything that's
statute
not struck out or underlined is existing
Existing,
language in
okay.
the Senate budget.
in the
So
Senate
to
budget.
be clear, that we propose this as ledge council, which, so the underlying language is
Yep.
not in it, and we're proposing to be added.
But wouldn't the numbers at the bottom of this all be new language?
So the numbers at the bottom is a new proposed subsection C, but even in that subsection C, anything that's not underlined or struck out is already in the Senate budget.
Okay, not in statute, but in the Senate budget.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, except for the award for funds appropriated as follows, that's not, I'm sorry.
That should all be underlined.
Yeah, and just to be very clear, there's numbers in subsection C total what is already in the budget,
Yeah.
there's no new dollars.
Yeah. And this would be a 1 year while talks and studies go on to figure out a more equitable way to do this.
Correct.
Because I was just, the argument could certainly be made that any one of these programs has a certain amount of overhead that has to be covered. And there has to be recognition for that.
Yeah, the point of subsection C is to notwithstand subsection F, which subsection F is the annual language.
So I know there's been a fair bit of history with your organizations all coming together, and that this part is not supported by everybody. The folks from the NEK have asked for essentially striking all changes of language. Is that right? Or just sort of maintain the status quo as it exists. Any other questions? Folks here. Does everybody feel like they got a strong understanding of this? Just going to kind of go over it one more time and make sure you nod in agreement. If right now we have two different versions in the conference committee. There's a Senate version and a House version. Neither one of them has what we see under letter C at the bottom here. That you are proposing as sort of a compromise position between sort of status quo and the sort of fixed per pupil amount, where that per pupil amount is exactly the same. The purpose for that is to sort of a little bit more of a glide path especially for the NEK, recognizing that in a world of money being appropriated on a per student basis, fewer students means less money. And that the goal is to essentially require these meetings. That's why we're bringing in the agency of administration in hopes that they will make sure it happens among all of the providers and the AOE to come up with a more equitable solution. Did I kind of do okay there?
Yes.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, I am going to move on to another topic, if you don't mind. But anyway, and another new topic for you. Because I was just cleaning, I went downstairs and I cleaned out my mailbox, and I just want to confirm, at least from Central Vermont, you are in strong support of a phone-free schools bill with a bell-to-bell prohibition on cell phones, even for the adult education programs.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think what we see is sometimes the result of what happens in the school system,
Yeah.
and then how they kind of end up at our door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's cyberbullying in the
Yeah,
schools,
that's a
we all
lot.
know, and that's a really big cause for dropout.
Yep. Definitely. Okay, why don't you, you're all set here, but don't leave the room for the moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do want to just clarify the budget adjustment language language into it, that it was added to the big bill.
Okay,
It's gonna help a much smaller handful of students, but there are some high schools that have not signed on to the new program. So there are some students that probably still help, and it is in the big bill.
all right. But like, there was other language in the BAA as well.
In the BAA, we just have the notwithstanding language to get students in.
Okay, all right, great. So I'm gonna just open it up for discussion. For the committee, we need to provide some sort of guidance. If we were to have the NEK folks come in, I'm pretty confident they would say we'd rather just leave everything the same and then get together. What would be the result if we just said, keep the funding as it has been and require the Agency of Administration to bring everybody together? What's the fiscal impact on everybody? I realize it maintains the inequity that exists if you're looking at it on a per pupil basis, but it doesn't necessarily hurt anyone financially, does it?
Well, it makes it challenging for, I mean, I can only speak about my own organization, but it makes it challenging for us to give our staff any sort of cost of living increase or to bring on any additional staff that we might need to serve the large number of students that we're currently serving. So it would really kind of, we do have a fairly robust private fundraising that we do on our own, that we've done for years because we needed it in order to be able to do the work that we do. With the small per pupil money that we get in central Vermont. It would just cost us like putting on hold a lot of the plans that we had around creating some changes for our hardworking staff members.
So central Vermont, for example, would, under the new proposal, would go from essentially 1.2 to 1.3 million in funding. TTC, that's the tutorial center.
Correct. Yep.
Would be looking at a, decrease.
I mean, the TTC is supportive of what we're in front of you proposing.
Yeah.
They've kind of planned for the fact that they were facing a decrease and have made, with a turnover of a lease, have made some changes about their programming.
All right, so I would like some input from committee members. We need to provide some input to the conference committee.
And I think I've made it for as represented from the Northeast Kingdom, I can't support this. Especially when it's just for 1 year and it's going to change again in a year anyway. I think that's some instability for everybody, not just the NEK, to just, oh, here's your funding for 1 year and then your funding mechanism is going to change again. So I support leaving the language as it is in the big bill while they are figuring out the new funding system.
Ultimately, the decision is going to come down to the folks of the conference committee.
It really is.
I agree about the double transition, like if we're gonna transition, then transition again, but part of having this softer transition first does make some sense to me logically. But I am worried about the transition and the transition being too much.
Under what scenario does it revert to the AOE's 2-year student average of 3294 for everybody? Does that version exist in either of the two versions within the conference committee right now?
I think so.
Okay. So really, it's sort of status quo versus sort of the compromise that is being proposed here.
Yeah, I'll just say, well, I totally hear your perspective and understand why you feel that way. I actually think that if it looks to me like we're heading in a new direction here based on these numbers, and I actually think the glide path is the smart way to go. I would hate to see, because I just feel like kicking can down the road a year is gonna make it potentially much harder. And maybe more steep for folks. I think this needs to be addressed.
I will kind of put together some language before we sort of have time together again to sort of.
Yeah.
I think we'll try to put forth not necessarily a committee position, but we'll provide as much guidance as we can. Everybody, please think about this overnight, and we may do a little straw poll on it as well. To run it. Those on the conference committee are, I assume, as well versed in this as we now are, as I'm sure they've been talking to people. So to whatever extent we make a difference, they've asked for our input, we'll provide it. Okay, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you so much for letting us come in.
We'll have a break to,
Anything else on that?
we do,
Oh, yeah. Leanne has to go.
we're gonna do we can do the straw poll on 248. That's what I'd like us to do. Do people want a break, or you want to just kind of dive right in?
Right in.
All right, let's dive right in. Probably a little early. I will say that when I went down to get my mail,
It's going to cost more.
the Senate Education Committee
One, two.
was in the lounge
Well, because
hanging out.
Spread it.
Like, remember,
Since we have more centers.
just like they're sort of taking that 1 day break like we did after we passed out the big bill.
Big bill?
Our big education.
Our big bill.
Oh,
We do have a big.
it was a big
They
bill.
were just enjoying an afternoon off. Okay, so we have the amendment to H 248 in front of us that will straw poll. Beth, you want me to?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Anybody want to sort of wait? I'll weigh in first, and then we'll see how people want to go out. So I absolutely support this concept if there is enough money in the CCFAP program in order to take the burden off of the education fund. And right now it appears that there might be. However, for me, this is more of an order of operations issue, whereas JFO testified to Human Services that it would be prudent to first try to unwind the knot that is CCFAP funding universal pre-K, where federal dollars may be wound in there as well, and the things that come with it. This is an H bill that won't be acted on this year anyway. Meanwhile, JFO is going to be doing their thing. So for me, just from an order of operations point of view, I would, before acting on this, I would rather find out from JFO what's possible. There was one thing in the last bit of testimony that the question is, does the Child Care Contribution Special Fund have sufficient revenue over time to continue to fund this? Most of the stuff I just heard from there did not sway me at all. I still consider this to be a good way to go, just for me in order of operations. Anybody else? Yes.
Do you know what's the JFO timeline for sort of unraveling all those pieces? Is this something we'll have more clarity on at the start of next year, or what's their?
Thank you for that. So there is language in H454 for this JFO study to be done. I think one of the concerns that Representative Holcomb had was whether if that language was removed, what happens? JFO testified, and Human Services are doing it. They're going to just do it anyway. They've been interested in this issue for quite a while. That's going to happen, and it'll be ready by January.
Regardless of whether there's legislative language passed, it's just work that's ongoing.
Yeah.
I agree that it would be great to alleviate some of the pressure on the ed fund, but I'm not fully ready to say that this is the way to do it and it can sustain any of the funding. We haven't really, historically, we haven't seen what it can do yet, so I wouldn't be in favor of this at this point.
Are you ready to just drop? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
To understand
I
how.
think I'm trying to formulate the question I have. So go ahead.
No, this is the appropriate moment to make a comment.
Absolutely.
So agree with all of that, although I think that I share the frustration of some folks in this room that every time we try to make any, like literally any kind of progress in taking costs out of the ed fund, we just can't seem to get there. So I'll express that as a frustration.
I'll agree. I will add to that and say that the sort of issue of early college and the ed fund is one that we will continue to talk about. We originally sort of have heard through the grapevine that this really isn't a big issue except at a couple of schools. Every school I visit, and I was just at Twin Valley way down on the Massachusetts border yesterday, and the number of seniors on campus on a day-to-day basis is like less than half a dozen.
Yeah.
So it is having an impact. I think it's an impact we need to be taking a deeper look at as well.
I think another thing that we haven't really talked about too is that it's like a trickle effect too, right? Like as you lose your seniors and the juniors become the seniors, they're eventually gonna wanna get out. And then our sophomores are gonna like feel like school isn't that great, there's no one to look up to. And then it's gonna be our freshmen. Not saying we're gonna send eighth graders to early college,
Yeah.
but we'll have a trickle effect.
Right, but early college is not on the table at the moment.
No.
But it's just one more pressure on the ed fund that I think this committee needs to take a deep look at.
So just to so just in thinking about Twin Valley and thinking about everything that we've been talking about since January, school consolidation, everything that Zoe said, day one about giving kids more opportunities. Is this like a symptom of what's going on there anyway? Because I think that Twin Valley is a pretty small school, and if there's a half a dozen seniors, how many are taking advantage of their early college, like 20 or 30?
Yes.
So it's a tiny school to begin with.
Right.
That doesn't have the kinds of robust offerings that would keep kids around.
That's going to be that'll be all part of our early college discussion.
Right. So I guess this has been the discussion since January, right? About creating schools with more opportunity.
Yeah.
Right.
There are some geographic isolation issues down there.
So you do get that with the Twin Valley. If they can't offer the APs and the other classes, are like, why not go take?
Anyway, we're going to say
Anyway,
That includes pre-K.
Yes.
And I'm gonna just say, I actually support this amendment, and I think it's that while the timing might not be ideal and perfect, I actually think it's the right thing to do. And so I'm gonna support.
And this is probably the newbie in me. So we have this amendment we're gonna vote on, but really it wouldn't get taken up till next year. And by the time we get here, JFO will have hopefully already come up with their findings. Why do we have to do this now? Why can't we table this till beginning of next year when we have all the information in front of us so we can actually make a educated decision as opposed to saying, well, we're going to say no now because we don't know what the JFO is going to say in January, but we're not going to touch this bill anyway until next year.
So I don't know if that is a question or a comment as to why you're going to vote.
No. It's a question as to why do we have to do this now?
We don't
have
to do anything.
But that's we're saying here. We're going to do this.
So if I'll just turn that into a comment, that would be sort of one of the comments is why would we be voting for this now when we're going to get the information?
I guess that is my comment. Why not? Can we all just wait until we have the information and then make the decision?
The presenter of the amendment basically said more or less the same thing, but more on the side of then come January, we would be hitting the ground running and it would be done.
That's where
and even though I'm not going to support this, there is an argument to say we can go home and say we're doing our best to pull costs out of the ed fund and relieve the burden on property taxpayers.
So the underlying bill, H248, is on the calendar.
Yes, but it missed crossover.
But we are still going to vote.
We're voting.
Yeah.
Still,
So I guess
we are. Things are on the calendar that don't seem to ever get to the floor. Yeah.
It has postponed until the 8th, so it's on the move.
Yeah. It would be as if we passed out H54.
Right.
As a standard.
Right. Yeah.
I'm torn. I support the idea of it. I think I'm in the same camp as you. I really think I like the idea of this amendment, but is it premature?
I'm kind of conceptually, if the money's there and things can be unwound and there aren't federal implications and all of that, but totally support the concept as well. But I also support knowing all that information first.
So again, how about postponing until the beginning of next year?
It's not our call. We're just being asked to.
I guess that's what I'm saying is I don't understand why we're voting.
Because there's an amendment on the floor that
Okay.
we've been asked to.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'm like, why are we
We
keep
can't
fighting?
stop it.
Okay, that was really the question I was having is why, are- yeah, thank
So
you.
I'm going to ask a newbie process question as well. So if it's unfavorable,
Yeah.
and the amendment is not attached at this time, she could bring up an amendment,
It's a floor amendment.
floor amendment, but if, when this bill 248, could it be amended later? Once we have the information from JFO, could this be brought up again
Yeah,
in January or February
or it could be a standalone bill.
or standalone bill? Okay, so it not going
It does not.
favorably now doesn't kill it. Okay, thank
Yeah, but
you.
it does make.
It does make a state.
Yes. If the vote in this committee is unfavorable, when I give our vote explanation, I will, if it's okay with the committee, say that there is broad support for investigating this to the greatest possible degree as a way to alleviate pressure on the ed fund,
Agreed.
if nobody has any issues with that. Okay, I'm going to do a reverse vote here. I'm going to vote how many of us find this unfavorable, just to put the higher number first. Okay, so all those finding it unfavorable, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those who find it favorable, raise your hand. 2, 3.
And 1.
Oh, I'm missing one. Okay, thank you.
11.
Thank you, everybody. That is our work for the day.
Is there a way to record your like a 50-50